I want you to try a thought experiment with me. It's a little weird, so just stick with me for a second.
Okay, I'm with you.
We usually think of time as, a straight line, right? The past is behind us, future's ahead, the past is done. It's in the books.
That's the conventional view, yes. The linear progression of history.
Right. But imagine for a moment that the past isn't actually past. Imagine history is this giant open ledger, a book of debts that never closes.
Okay.
And every single day, you're not just waking up to your own life, your own job. You are waking up to the unpaid bills of your ancestors from, 500, maybe 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the scariest part, someone is knocking at the door to collect.
That is a haunting image. And it brings us directly to the heart of the material we're covering today. We're doing a deep dive into a source called The Anatomy of Historical Fury.
And I have to say, this source material it's heavy. This is not a light beach read. It's a dense, almost psychohistorical analysis of contemporary India.
It really is.
It talks about a concept called moral time. And honestly, when I first read that phrase, moral time, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Is it like a moral clock or something?
It's less about a clock and more about a burden. Moral time is the key concept here. The central thesis of this deep dive is that we're witnessing a fundamental restructuring of collective consciousness.
Okay.
The argument is that history has transformed from a subject you study in a classroom, dates, battles, treaties, into a standing indictment.
So history isn't just stuff that happened. It's become an active, emotional thing in the present.
Exactly. It is no longer a series of completed events. It has become an active, emotional reservoir that is flooding into the present. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly how that shift happened.
Because it didn't just happen overnight.
Not at all.
Right. We're going to look at how India went from what the source calls a suspended memory, where history was kind of put on pause, to this intense, activated grievance we see today.
And we'll also look at the role of cinema in all this, because pop culture is often where these psychological shifts really show up first.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We'll discuss the dark logic of what the source calls blood debt. And finally, and I think this is the part you're going to find most surprising, we're going to explore a largely forgotten indigenous antidote to all this anger.
Which I am very eager to get to, because the anger part is, well, it's intense. But let's start with the before picture. The source talks about this period called the liberal interregnum.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the mid-20th century, right after independence in 1947.
Precisely. To understand the fury of the present, you have to understand the calm that came before it. The source argues that during the British colonial period, there was this inadvertent grafting of Enlightenment values onto the Indian elite.
Enlightenment values, so like secular rationalism, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Secular rationalism, constitutional governance, and critically historical objectivity.
Okay, so the people leading the country, the Nehru generation, they looked at history through this very specific detached lens.
They did. They viewed history as something you study with distance. Like, oh, that happened in 1650. Interesting.
Right, rather than that happened in 1650 and I am personally furious about it today.
That is a perfect way to put it. It's the difference between walking through a museum and walking into a courtroom.
Yeah.
For that generation, the goal was to build a modern nation state. Citizenship was based on legal equality, not religious identity. It was a conscious choice to, bracket the past.
So the idea was we're building a future where our grandparents' wars don't define our relationship.
Yes. The source calls this a temporary suspension of deeper memory.
But was that real? Or was it just an elite thing? The source points to the movies from that era as proof that this mindset actually trickled down, right? The golden age of Hindi cinema.
Yes, the cinema of the 1950s through the 70s is probably the most vibrant evidence of this mindset. If you watch those films, you see a world that is naturally syncretic.
Syncretic. Okay, that's a bit of a $50 word. Break that down for us.
It just means the blending of different cultures and religions into a seamless whole. The mixture isn't forced, it's just the water everyone is swimming in.
I see.
In those films, you had characters speaking a mix of Hindi and Urdu. It wasn't a political statement, it was just how people talked.
Right, and you had Muslim characters who were just part of the fabric of the story.
Exactly. Think of the noble courtesan in Pakiza, or probably the most famous example, the loyal friend in Sholay.
That was Sholay, of course. That's iconic. And you're right, there's the Imam's son.
And think about his role. Is he there to be the Muslim character? Is his storyline even about his religion?
No, not really. He's just
a
guy, a friend. He's tragic, he's noble. but his religion is just a detail. It's like having a mustache or something.
Precisely. His identity wasn't a problematic core. The source emphasizes that the cinematic universe didn't preach tolerance in some heavy-handed way. It just presumed a shared cultural fabric.
So it mirrored the liberal project of the time. Set aside the burdens of history, focus on now. Okay, so we have this era of suspended memory. Sounds pretty good, honestly. So why didn't it stick? Why are we talking about fury today?
Because, according to the source, that era was an interregnum, a pause between two storms. The argument is that this liberal peace was borrowed.
Borrowed? Borrowed from where?
From foreign intellectual traditions, mostly the West. The source argues these values of secular distance didn't have deep enough roots in the soil. They couldn't withstand the eventual return of indigenous memory.
So it was a top-down thing.
A top-down imposition of calm that didn't necessarily reflect the simmering memory below.
It was like a lid on a boiling pot, and eventually the pressure gets too high and the lid just blows off.
Exactly. And that leads us to the psychic shift. The source describes a transition where the liberal elite loses influence, democracy deepens, and suddenly the past comes rushing back.
The return of the repressed.
That's the term it uses.
But when you say the past comes back, we're not just talking about people suddenly getting really into history books.
No. It is a psychohistorical shift. The past flooded into the present not as context, but as an indictment. And the way history was retold is crucial here.
Right. The source talks about how the medieval period was completely reframed.
Yes. Medieval Indian history is incredibly complex. You have shifting alliances, economics, state formation.
All the messy stuff.
All the messy stuff. But in this new consciousness, that complexity was flattened. It was turned into a monolithic saga of humiliation.
Monolithic saga of humiliation. Wow. That's a heavy phrase.
It means the entire history was reduced to a single story. Temple destruction, iconoclasm, loss of sovereignty. It became a story solely about Hindu victimhood.
And this isn't just about old buildings. This impacts real people today. This was the part of the source that really stopped me in my tracks. The concept of historical residue. Can you break that down? Because it sounds incredibly dehumanizing.
It is deeply dehumanizing, and that is the analytical point the source is making. In this new psychic economy, the Indian Muslim is no longer viewed primarily as a co-citizen or a neighbor. They are viewed as historical residue.
Residue, like leftovers, like something stuck to the bottom of a
That's
pen.
the living reminder. The argument is that they are seen as the unconscious inheritors of that medieval trauma.
So when someone gripped by this historical fury looks at a Muslim shopkeeper today, they aren't seeing a guy selling groceries.
They're seeing a shadow of an invader from 1,000 years ago.
That is terrifying. I mean, you could never just be an individual. You're always an avatar for something else. You're walking around wearing a costume you didn't even choose.
That is the argument. The contemporary identity is shrouded by a shadow cast from the past, and it extends to geopolitics. Pakistan becomes more than a rival. It becomes the externalized symbol of the invader.
The modern-day address for a medieval grievance.
That's it.
Now, I have to ask, because this is always the elephant in the room, what about the politics? The source mentions the BJP and the Sangh Parivar. Is the source saying they created this feeling?
The nuance here is really important, and we need to be precise about what the text says.
Okay.
The source argues that these political groups are not the architects of this sentiment, but the crystallizers.
Crystallizers, I like that word. It implies the solution was already saturated, right?
Exactly. Like in chemistry class, you can't crystallize anything if the liquid isn't already saturated. The source is saying they didn't invent the anger out of thin air. The psychological shift was already germinating. What these political groups did was provide the language, the institutional muscle, and the legitimacy to bring it to the surface.
They gave a name to the feeling.
And a vehicle for the grievance. It's like they tapped into a vein that was already pulsing. They didn't put the blood there, but they inserted the needle.
That is a powerful way to put it. And going back to culture, the source says you can see this shift happening in real time in the movies again. We went from that golden age to something very different.
Very different. The source calls it cinema as cultural pedagogy.
Pedagogy as in teaching. So movies became a classroom.
A classroom for belonging. The source contrasts the earlier era with modern big-budget narratives. Now, you increasingly see the Muslim characters stereotyped as the fanatical terrorist or the treacherous sleeper agent.
The enemy within.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it creates a common sense, doesn't it? If you see the same story 100 times, you start to believe that's just how the world is.
It teaches you that suspicion is the correct default setting.
Precisely. And there's a specific detail the source highlights about language that I found just heartbreaking: the fate of Urdu.
Oh, right, the language of poetry. I always associate Urdu with beautiful songs, ghazals.
It was the language of sophistication across North India for centuries. But the source notes that Urdu is increasingly marginalized now. It's treated as foreign or contaminated.
Why? Just because of its history?
Both its script and its history. It's a linguistic purification that mirrors the desire to cleanse the culture of those historical residues. If you remove the words, you remove the connection to that composite heritage.
You stop being able to read the poetry that bridged the two cultures. This urge to cleanse. It leads us to the darkest part of the source material.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the violence. The source discusses mob lynching, but it doesn't just call it a crime, it calls it a ritualized performance.
Yes, that wording is very deliberate.
Why that phrasing?
Because a crime is usually hidden. If you rob a bank, you wear a mask, you run away, you don't want to be seen.
Yeah.
These acts are performed publicly, they are often filmed.
And circulated on social media, so the audience is part of the act.
The camera is as important as the weapon. They are ritualized performances of historical judgment. By doing it publicly, the mob is claiming what the source calls a retributive sovereignty.
Retributive sovereignty, that sounds like a legal term.
It means they are saying, we don't need the court, we don't need the police, we answer to a higher historical moral law.
So they're bypassing the state.
Entirely. Bypassing evidence, due process, individual rights, to enact a historical vengeance.
And this brings us to the philosophical core of the problem.
Yeah.
This is the part I really had to read twice. The source calls it moral anachronism.
Yes.
Can we just walk through this?
Yes.
Because it feels like a total logic trap.
It's a double fallacy, and it's crucial to understand. Moral anachronism happens when you judge actors from the past, say an 11th century conqueror, by 21st century liberal standards of tolerance and human rights.
So we're mad at a medieval king for acting like a medieval king.
Exactly. Kings back then, whether they were Hindu, Muslim, Christian, operated on norms of plunder and iconoclasm. That was the global standard.
Right, there was no Geneva Convention in the year 1000. It was conquer or be conquered.
Correct. But here's the contradiction, the second part of the fallacy. The current movement judges those past figures by modern liberal standards. Look how they violated human rights. But simultaneously abandons modern liberal principles when dealing with people today.
That's the twist. Because the bedrock of modern law is individual innocence. You don't punish a son for the crimes of the father.
Yeah.
But this logic says, no, the guilt is hereditary.
It creates a blood debt. The source asks a terrifying question. Does the violence of Mahmud of Ghazni in the 11th century morally license violence against a dairy farmer in 21st century Uttar Pradesh?
And if the answer is yes, if we accept that logic, then where does it end?
It doesn't. We fall into the abyss. Because if historical wrongs can be morally inherited, civilization collapses. Everyone has a claim against everyone else.
The British against the Romans, the Greeks against the Persians.
The Mongols, the British, the Mughals, the Vikings. History is a slaughter bench. If we all start clicking blood debts, the cycle of vengeance never ever ends.
This is a slippery slope to total chaos. It feels like a trap. But, and here's the twist I did not see coming, the source offers a way out. And I expected it to say, we need to go back to being liberals. But it doesn't say that.
No, it doesn't.
It points to something else entirely.
And that is the supreme irony here. The source suggests the antidote to this historical fever isn't Western liberalism, which it argues is too fragile anyway. It's an ancient Indian concept. Hanika, the Buddhist doctrine of impermanence.
Talk to me about this. How does a Buddhist concept fix a modern political crisis? Are we supposed to just meditate the anger away?
It's deeper than that. The philosophy holds that all empires, all grievances, all victories and defeats are transient. They are conditioned phenomena. They rise and they fall.
The marauders are gone. Their empires are dust.
Exactly. So instead of seeing the past as a debt we have to pay, we should see it as
what?
As sediment. The source uses this beautiful geological metaphor. It says, stop looking at history as a ledger of debts. Look at it as a riverbed. What remains after the empire falls isn't a bill to be paid.
It's the sediment of culture, art, language, and food.
That's it. And that reframes everything. Because if you look at something like the Taj Mahal, the historical fury perspective says, that's a symbol of my humiliation.
A symbol of conquest.
But the Anyaka perspective, the perspective of synthesis, says, no, that is civilizational genius.
Genius, that's a strong word.
Yes. because it is proof of India's ability to absorb foreign influences and create something entirely new. The ghazal wasn't just a leftover, it was born from the mix of Persian and Indian sensibilities. It is quintessentially Indian.
So to reject it is to reject a part of yourself.
You're committing civilizational self-harm. You are cutting off a limb of your own culture. The source points to the living geography to prove this. It mentions the river Gomal.
I don't think I know that one.
It's a river that flows today just as it did in ancient texts. The source mentions the word dukkha, suffering, echoing in local dialects near that river. These are living threads that defy the simple binary of us versus them.
They're older than the kings, and they'll outlast the politics.
Yes, and that's the diagnosis the source leaves us with. It says India is suffering from historical fever.
An inflamed memory overwhelming the rational faculties needed for the future.
And it contrasts this fever with true confidence. I love this point. If you're truly confident in your civilization, you don't need to be insecure about the past.
Right. True confidence is forward-looking. It acknowledges the past without being enslaved by it. You don't need to avenge history if you're secure in who you are today.
The source argues that chaining yourself to an identity defined by victimhood is actually a sign of weakness, masquerading as strength.
Because if your whole identity is based on being a victim, you require the perpetual presence of an enemy to validate your own story. You can never really be free.
And that leads to the final choice the source lays out. It returns to that metaphor of the river.
Silt and song.
Yes. The river of time carries both silt, the mud, the grievance, the heavy stuff and song. The choice is whether to be dragged under by the swirling sediment of ancient grievances.
Or to learn to harmonize with the music.
That is the choice.
It really makes you think about your own relationship with the past, doesn't it? Not just for a nation, but personally. We all have ledgers.
We do. And the question is, are those debts keeping you from hearing the music that is playing right now?
That is the question to leave you with. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the anatomy of historical fury. It was a heavy one, but an important one.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Catch you next time.